Hi, in this video I'm gonna talk about NixOS, but specifically about music production on Linux. Now, I've already previously made some videos about working with containers. In the description you can find the videos about the different topics, distro box containers, Linux, music production, etc. But in this video I'm gonna talk about setting up your NixOS system for music production. But before I do this, I have a question for you. What is the difference between a cat and a bass player? A cat knows what tuner is. I've already made some different videos about, for example, using an Arch Linux container, basically installing Arch Linux inside another Linux distro for music production and working, with the real-time privileges and setting up audio performance, etc. But I've reached a new point. And not just that I have switched basically my main system to Ardour, so I'm basically no longer using Reaper. Even though I must say, for the context of this video, it has zero relevance. But yeah, what are some key characteristics of NixOS that might make it, scary for some users? And why do I believe that music production on Linux is way simpler than on Arch or other distros? You have to get to know, be comfortable with the config file, etc. But let's just say you put in a day or two's worth of effort into learning NixOS, etc. And then I could safely assume that you will be more comfortable with NixOS than you would be with other Linux distros. And I'm not just giving you a tutorial, but also explain you why. Inside NixOS, you do not work with a normal average package manager like apt on Debian, DNF, Pacman on Arch, but you work with the config file. What are some key characteristics? Basically, you always rebuild your system. Basically, you make changes to the config file, then you rebuild your system, and a new generation is going to be created. Basically, that's also helpful, for example, if you switch from the unstable channel, the rolling release channel, to a stable channel, there is no real downgrading happening because you're just generating a new generation of the stable packages. But again, I'm derailing the topic again. So let's start with the basics. Now on NixOS, first of all, we start with the installation, obviously, who would have guessed? And also in the choice of desktop environments, that's really completely up to you. I use Plasma Carré because I just like Plasma Carré, but you can use whichever desktop environment you like. Now, before I bombard you with all different informations about NixOS and working with the operating system and blah blah blah, I wanna explain to you some basics. What am I going to show you? Now, for example, because on NixOS you don't really have a package installer. Yes, you can work with Nix in it. I can just show you. Let's go to Nix packages. And for example, go to fast fetch. So here you have the possibility of installing packages temporarily. Which means that you create a shell and then after leaving the shell, the package is no longer available to you. You do not need to understand it. What I can say is, in this showcase and in regards of music production, Nix shell and Nix environment. Both of them I do not use, only NixOS configuration. So you can ignore these two here, because you can install them permanently, but yeah, it's also written there it's not really the best choice you could make, and I really would not recommend that one. Just to use NixOS configuration. So you know, here you have environment, system packages, packages, fast fetch. I'm just gonna shove it to the side here. Then do the same here. Now, so how do we install it? You go first of all cd/etc/NixOS. Then press ls. Here you have the configuration.nix file. With that one, you can modify your system, etc. And that one is the hardware configuration.nix file. Basically, what I can tell you, do not touch that. You can more or less ignore that one, because it's all automated, etc. Just focus on that one. So how do we install, for example, fast fetch? You go to sudo nano. Nano is a text editor, because the configuration file is a text, more or less. So you need to edit the text. And then configuration.nix. Then press enter. The password. Now I will explain what all of them mean in a second, but let's scroll down. So yeah. Again, here you have environment system packages. Now let's go here. Okay. And here you have environment system packages with packages. So here you have that one standing here. Exact same as here. And packages is already written here. So the only thing you need to do enter fast fetch here. Again, packages is already declared here. You do not need to extra write it here. Then what you need to do, new terminal, then press sudo NixOS rebuild switch. What does that mean? Sudo means to run a program as administrator, as the overlord of the computer, basically. NixOS rebuild, because because what you do is to not install packages in your current setting, but you generate a new one. And then press NixOS rebuild switch, which means to apply the changes right now. Then press password. Building Nix, building the system configuration. And now, done, the new configuration is blah 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 blah. So basically what you can do now is fast fetch, and now it is installed. You were successful. Now, what I can say is, for example, I mean, fast fetch is some little programs, good and fine, but where do you go when you try to install GPU drivers, for example? Then you go to NixOS Wiki. So NixOS Wiki. So basically the NixOS Wiki website and the Nix packages website are the two websites essential to install packages. And what I would also always recommend for you to do is first check NixOS Wiki. For example, GPU drivers, virt manager. And if it's not available here, not written down here or declared here, just go to Nix packages and search here. So look here first and here second. So now we have installed some packages. What I can do now, for example, is htop, btop, for example. Then here the Vim editor, vchat if you would want to. And then sudo NixOS rebuild switch. And now these packages here, btop, htop, are available to us. Now, before I continue, there's something I want to do. For example, now I'm going to install gparted for managing partitions. So, parted, and then gparted. Yeah, I press Ctrl O to save the changes, and then you can press Ctrl X to leave the editor, which I do not need right now. It's the nano editor. And then I'm gonna press sudo NixOS rebuild boot. Now this is different, so I can So previously I've run NixOS rebuild switch. Now what I'm gonna do? NixOS rebuild boot. Okay. Now building Nix. Waiting for the system configuration. So the process is exactly the same right now. So it is done. The configuration is done. And here can, for example, gparted -- version. Aha. The gparted program is not installed right now, even though I rebuilt my system. Why is that the case? Because if I would have typed sudo NixOS rebuild switch, we would have this program available to us right now. But I've declared sudo NixOS rebuild boot. That means I need to reboot my system for the installation to be complete. Now with the gparted program, that's unnecessary. But if you're installing GPU drivers or change the kernel or some swappiness factors, for example, then running NixOS boot instead of switch would be recommendable. I mean, again, this has nothing to do with audio production directly, but some fundamental information that might come handy to you in the future. But now you know. And then you can reboot the system. But what I can tell you is that we have run NixOS rebuild multiple times already. Maybe with switch or with boot. Why am I mentioning this? You will see in a second. Sudo reboot. Because now we do not have one NixOS, you have here multiple generations. And here you can go to the BIOS, but it's unimportant right now. Because, for example, on that here, I think I've installed htop btop. So if I boot into that here, htop btop would not be available to me. Okay? So if and here is the newest configuration where gparted is installed and available to us. Because again, on NixOS, it combines the advantages of mutable and immutable Linux distros. It is fundamentally superior to both of them. Okay, I'm just provoking here, but I really, this is one of the reasons why I like NixOS the most of all Linux distros. Because, for example, if some update broke your system, everything is changed here. You can just boot into a previous generation and boot into that one. Because on Arch Linux, for example, you need to work with Timeshift, for example, and that broke on me, it did not work. Here you have a Timeshift functionality on an operating system level, more or less. But again, unimportant right now. We can boot into the system now and continue with the instruction. Then press the password. Now, before I go to the different settings, kernel and whatever, I just want to give you a brief explanation about NixOS. Again, I have already made a video specifically about NixOS, but just to provide you some context. Basically, the context being working with the NixOS Wiki side and working with the Nix packages side. I would really recommend, if you're using NixOS, to pin these two sites to your browser, your favorites for example. And before I continue with the topic, I really must say, DaVinci Resolve is native in the repositories. You just need to go to the Nix packages, install it into your config file, and there's no containerization setup and no problems whatsoever. Just a side note from me. But again, let's continue with the video. Having a reliable system is fundamental for every production setup, maybe for game development, maybe for music production, and whatever else. And NixOS has some fundamental advantages, not really directly correlated with music production, but indirectly. What do I mean with that? For example, as I've said previously, in NixOS, I really should explain this in another video in further detail, you do not change your environment basically, but you create a new generation of it. Basically, what I can say is that NixOS combines the best attributes of mutable and immutable Linux distros. It's better than both of them together, I think. But what can I say? If something should break, for example, a package, going crazy, whatever, then you do not even need to make timeshift snapshots, for example, or any of that, because again, during each update, during each rebuild, not every rebuild needs to be an update, you create a new generation. And if the generation should be faulty, you can switch to the previous generation. And again, if you need a reliable system setup, this is fundamentally important. And again, you do not need extra programs like you would need on Arch Linux, for example. And that's a fundamental advantage. I really must say that NixOS makes things already from the get-go way more comfortable to work with, easier and more reliable. Independent if you're working with X4, Buffersize or whichever else, or which other file system you would want to work with. As great as the NixOS Wiki is, I really must say is that the Arch Wiki is the holy grail of Linux documentation. And NixOS is not terrible anymore, but still has room for improvement. And so in this video I'm gonna also sometimes refer to the NixOS Wiki in some aspects, but share you my own experiences and also give you code snippets or text snippets, etc. So you have some visual correlation how a NixOS config file is being generated. Yeah, I mean, that sounds complicated. It is not complicated, okay? It's just fundamentally different, but yeah. That's important right now. So, again, yeah. But just that you have seen it at least once. CD, then press ls, and then I'm just gonna type in cut hardware configuration.nix. Cut is basically just, show me what is written in this configuration file. And here you have, do not modify this file, so they are already warning you to not make any changes here. But again, the file system, the swap devices, everything is configured here. You do not need to do anything. It's clear. But again, let's go back to sudo nano configuration.nix file. That's the password. So edit this configuration to the bigger maybe. Edit this configuration file to define what should be installed on your system. Yeah, it's an explanation here. Because again, in the same folder where the configuration.nix file is the hardware.configuration.nix file. So it's basically, you know, all what is written in here is scanned through the NixOS configuration file to be available to your system. The import section will be important to us later on. It's optional, but it makes working way easier. I will explain later. Then the networking host name, you can change that if you would want to. Because again, NixOS, you can use it for managing servers or gaming, audio production, video production. In a business level, it is a multifunctional operating system. And yeah, so not everything here is really essential to us. Then here, the KDE desktop environment, the key mapping, the printing support. And again, now we are talking about music production. And yeah, now in regards of music production, Pulse Audio, I'm working with Pipewire, so we're saying services Pulse Audio enable equals false. Basically to disable that one. The Realtime kit enabled through services Pipewire. This is the multifunction driver. It's basically a video driver, audio driver. We want to have this enabled. So the ALSA enabled, ALSA support 32-bit, we want this. Pulse enable. But here you can see check enable equals true is disabled. Commented out. Now, if you're working with audio interfaces and plugging microphones, guitars, etc., you would want to have this enabled. So just delete the hashtag and save it. Then we can scroll down. Then define a user account. So now this is the name of my user, extra groups. Because on other Linux distros, for example, you type in, for example, I think in Arch, you type in sudo usermod -ag audio and then your username. Okay, so to add yourself to Realtime group, audio group, video group. On NixOS, it is actually easier. You just go here, exclamation mark, audio, exclamation mark again, maybe a space, and then save it. Yeah, packages. Now, I think I should explain this because you can install packages here, in this category, or here. Basically, that means if you install packages here, these are only available to the specific user. And if you install them here, they are in the system level available. But since I'm the only person working with this computer, I'm just throwing everything down here. And then what you need to do is just sudo NixOS rebuild switch your password, and it's just going to do its thing. So now, for example, go to gparted. You know, the program I've talked earlier is now available to us. So and again, you know, going here and for example, if you have an NVIDIA GPU, I have an NVIDIA. I'm gonna skip this part because this is just about music production. But okay, the website is loading. And here, for example, what you need to copy paste in here. I think, again, I will skip over this part because this is not music production necessary, but in a future video, for example, I will talk about this, or maybe show you my configuration file. That would be interesting, maybe. So, now what I also would recommend to do is to install Flatpaks. Why Flatpaks? Because we're working with QPV graph, for example. You can install them natively via Nix packages. I think, yeah, this is a preference, okay? You can do however you want to. So for example, here you can etc NixOS configuration.nix. We are currently in this directive. And say you need to add this here. So basically what I could just copy it and then copy it somewhere on your system. Make a hashtag, for example, a comment of your site, Flatpak, copy paste it here, and then press sudo NixOS rebuild switch. I mean, everything is documented here, so if something's not working, you can just read documentation. And then the next thing we need to do and then just type in Flatpak remote add this comment here. Then enter your password. And then you need to reboot your system for Flatpak to work properly. Again, you can skip this part. That's your own preference. And again, this generation does not have Flatpak installed. This one does have Flatpak installed. Beep-a-doo-ba-wee. And then already we can go on and install, for example, a different kernel. Because if there are multiple different kernels inside Linux and optimized for different kinds of purposes. For example, you have the hardened kernel. The hardened kernel, if you are working, data security, whatever. For example, Unix, for example, works with the hardened kernel, I think. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, then you have the default kernel, now the basic average kernel. Then you have also the Realtime kernel. Now, the Realtime kernel does not exist in every Linux distro. For example, I think in Arch it was merged into other distro kernels, but that's unimportant. In NixOS, it is its own kernel. And if you want to do some music production, that would be the preferred choice. Because then you also have the Zen kernel that would be now optimized for gaming, not music production, for gaming, performance, etc. But again, what you want to work with is the Realtime kernel. Unlike other distros where each configuration file, changing the swappiness, changing the kernel, is spread around into multiple different kind of folders. You forget where this folder is located. You need to search for it to make changes to it. Again, in NixOS, everything is in the config file. So no code configuration would ever get lost. I mean, get lost in a folder directory you have forgotten. That's what I mean. Everything is centralized and you just need to scroll up and down the config file, because if it's not in the config file, it does not exist on your system. Prompto. And again, this makes system organization god tier among Linux distros, unironically. Wiki. And again, so now we know how we can install packages, we have enabled Flatpaks, so good, so fine. But now we need to start with the actual musical setup of your system. And I think the first thing to do is go to the NixOS Wiki and type in kernel. And also sudo nano etc NixOS configuration.nix password. And where is configuration.nix? So I think the kernel is nowhere declared. Yeah, if it's declared nowhere, that means you're just using the default Linux kernel. And here you can see how we can change that. I will show you later on. Yeah, so that one. And here you have a list of all the available Linux kernels. For example, the Zen kernel if you're not to gaming or just video production, for example. But what we are interested in is the Linux packages RT latest. Realtime, the latest Realtime kernel. So how are we doing this? Just go press enter, hashtag, and name it kernel, for example. And then type in, take that here, copy it, and then, again, what we need is that one. So the thing we need to do is type in -rt / realtime latest. Now that we have declared that we want to work with the realtime kernel. Because as you can see, when you type fast fetch, it is using the default Linux kernel. And now what we're going to do, we are typing NixOS rebuild boot. Because again, we are changing the kernel, so we are changing low-level stuff. And in that regard, it's always better to run boot in and not switch. Sudo NixOS rebuild boot password so yeah, it's gonna take some time here, but again, it did not crash. And then what we need to do is just reboot the system again. And now if we type in fast fetch, here we can see we are working with the realtime kernel. So voila. So the next thing I would really recommend you to do is, for example, when I open HTOP, here you can see I have 10 GB RAM because I'm inside a virtual machine. In truth, I have 32 GB of RAM. Now, again, it depends on how much RAM you have, but just to give you a showcase, we are going to enable ZRAM. What is ZRAM? I will explain in a second. Sudo NixOS configuration.nix, password. And you can type it anywhere again. So just maybe directly under kernel. That's done. Or it's set swap, because because, you know, most times, you know, the memory is swapped into the disk space to serve RAM, depending of the swappiness value you have enabled. But what we can do is to define a limited amount of the RAM, compress it, and say swap into this compressed area first before you swap onto the disk, because disk is always way slower than the RAM is. And we do this simple. Just type in z RAM swap equals, then opening bracket, and press enter, enable here equals true, algorithm equals Z standard. This is a Z standard is a compression program, basically. I mean, there are multiple ones that you have more choices than just Z standard. This is just the one I'm working with. And it's always recommendable to write things down correctly, because NixOS cannot solve issues in regards of grammatic. And then memory percent, how much memory, how much percent of the RAM should be declared as Z swap. And in this showcase, I'm just saying, I don't know, 20% for example. And then we just type in here a closing bracket. And then just sudo NixOS rebuild. Let's try switch. Oh, yeah, that's the problem. The exclamation marks need to be gone. So just that it's like that. And then you can type on swap on --show. And here you have, this here is the SSD partition on which the OS is installed on. And here you have 10 gigabytes of swap enabled. And no swap is currently being used. And here you have the ZRAM, the one we've created just now. The one existing inside a compressed part of the RAM. And yeah, it's just 1 gigabyte because again, I have 8 gigabytes in total RAM, or 9 gigabytes. So again, this is just as a showcase. You need to adjust the values depending on how much RAM you have, obviously. But just that you know how it basically works. And one thing I want to also mention, here you have priority. Because priority of ZRAM is 5. And priority of the SSD swap, the basic swap, is -2. Basically what that means, that priority -2 means that this swap is only being used when this swap is full. So again, this has a higher priority, so it is going to be used first, and -2 means use this swap partition as a last resort. Now we have done this. Now what we need to do, we need to add real-time settings. But before we do this, there's something really fundamental I need to show to you. because right now you have the NixOS configuration.nix file. So we are going to install the real-time privileges. And I think it's real-time check. Sound cards. Oh yes, we need to add this one here. Now, there's one thing that's really important to consider here. Because again, what we're going to do, we're going to add a lot of text here. I mean, that we can ignore, but other than that, we are gonna make lots of changes here. The thing is, the NixOS configuration, basically what you could do is to take that and copy paste it in here. The thing is, it is already not quite long, but you're going to install multiple packages, make some individual system configuration changes. So if you smash everything into the configuration.nix file in which we are currently in, then this would become a kilometer long. So you need to scroll down for hours to find specific changes you want to, change the values. That could be annoying. And so I'm gonna show to you something really essential. Again, I've talked about the import section is gonna be relevant to this video. And now I will explain why. Because let's exit htop. We're gonna type in cd/etc NixOS. Written correctly again. Then we type in ls. Again, we are now in the exact same folder where the configuration.nix file is. That's essential. Because what we're going to do is type in sudo touch and name it audio.nix. We're gonna create this ourselves. Okay, add password, and then we need to edit it. Because currently nothing is written down here. What we're gonna do is take the first line, configuration package, copy it into the audio.nix file, then create an opening bracket, create a closing bracket. So, and now we can, for example, copy paste the changes here. But if we just leave it like that, the system would not be able to recognize anything we are doing in this configuration here. Why is that the case? Because audio.nix may be in the same folder as configuration.nix, but yet we still need to import /audio.nix. So we also need to import them here. Sudo NixOS rebuild which password because on my host system I have a separate file for gaming, GPU drivers, a separate file for virtualization, a separate file. So you do not have to create separate files, but to keep your configuration files organized, that would be recommendable. So let's just check. So what we're going to do? Yeah, we're going to need to add Musnix, but we are going to do this later on. Oh, but no. We should create the Flake right now. So, NixOS Wiki again. go here to type in Flake, and again go to cd/etc/NixOS, where now the free files are stored here. And the Nix Flakes, I mean, there are multiple videos, especially the YouTube channel Wimjoyer explains this really well. So yeah, I'm just gonna skip over that. Basically what you need to do. So first of all, be in the exact same folder where the configuration.nix file is. So how exactly are you doing this? It was once written here. Yeah. First of all, what you need to do is go to, add this file here to the configuration.nix. So here, and let's name it enable Flakes. Because these are basically experimental functionalities of NixOS, but they are used quite heavily by the community, so they are quite reliable in that regard. So, and then we just go here, anywhere, and type in sudo NixOS rebuild switch. So now we are able to work with them. And what you need to do is again be in the same folder where configuration.nix is, and type in sudo nix flake init. Enter your password, and now we type in alias again, and now we have a new file, the flake.nix. And what we need to do is go to sudo nano flake.nix. Yeah, this is basically a NixOS Flake template. Now what am I going to do is to delete everything here, because I've already configured a Flake on my own. In the video description you can find it. So let's delete everything here. Go to the browser. And then go to personal folder, git, flake.nix, exactly. Again, you just have to copy paste it. I mean, I could explain everything in detail, what everything does, but this video is gonna be long as it is. So yeah, just some key information here, because now what we're going to do, instead of running with Nix channels, that's unimportant right now. What am I saying? What kind of version, system version am I running? And of this making of this video, it's 25.05. Again, in the future, a new version, a new stable version might be coming out, and you need to change these values here. Or you can just run the NixOS unstable branch, basically transform it into a rolling release distro. I'm not going to do this. And yeah, here you have input, lots of things commented out here. And yeah, I really must say I love NixOS and Nix Flakes, but lots of them I just copied from the internet. They work now, but again, I'm just providing you a template to work with that you are able to start. And just what I want to say, here I'm inputting the NixOS 25.05 stable branch onto my system and the Musnix. What is Musnix? Before I continue, Musnix, real-time audio and NixOS. So it's basically pre-made optimizations for NixOS. Using NixOS as a flake. This is what we are doing here. So what I can do is just type in. So Control O to save it, Control X to leave it. And now pay attention. We are gonna type in sudo NixOS rebuild switch -- flake etc/NixOS. Written correctly. Because why are we doing this? We are doing this because the flake, which we're currently editing, is in this directive. That's why we need to add it here. And then press enter. And you can see it's currently installing lots of things here. Particularly Musnix, the setup. Again, the setup was successful in my case. And yeah, what we're going to do now. Yeah. Go here to the audio.nix to make changes in regards of real time. Yeah. Then you can see, I mean, this was his configuration. I'm running a different one. So what I'm going to do, can take it security, Musnix. Copy paste it in here. I think sound card PCID, I can disable that one. Yeah, it's a bit of fiddling around, but here you can see we have installed and we have enabled Musnix in the Flake. No, it was here. But now we need to activate it, and we are doing this here. Enable also sequence. Then change some real-time behavior. So now we need to make sure that it also works. And rerun NixOS rebuild switch. Something tells me we have forgotten the exiting bracket. You need to pay really attention with the brackets here. And hallelujah, it's working. And type in. The origin postboot comment does not exist. Okay. I'm just going to... Now again, there are multiple ways in which you can configure your system, so it's not that just one way is right. But I think for the time being we can disable this entire section here. But yeah, what we're gonna also need to do is the power manager CPU governor. Basically to always have it in performance mode, which might be essential if you're trying to do some music production. CPU. Save it. And rebuild your system. Then what we need to do is the security PAM login limits. And then copy that one. That way we can disable because I'm not Firewire audio interface. Rebuild. Now this part we can skip because Musnix does already this process for us and many other more optimizations. So basically lots of these things I've tried to do here are already covered by Musnix. So again, I'm not the first one to struggle with that. And that's why this pre-configured setup does exist. So now here you have users, user groups we need to have enabled. Go to configuration.nix file and go down here. Okay, extra groups, my username, wheel, audio are already enabled. And I think on top of here, nah, that's basically this entire process is done correctly. But yeah, again, you know, on Linux distros, you need to enable, you know, the memlock, real-time priority, and this is how you do this in NixOS, so that you know how to do this. And it's documented here. And what I can say is that might look like a hassle, but I've made it working. And what I can say is once you have done it once, you do not need to touch it ever again. Because, you know, even if your system breaks, you can just copy paste this configuration.nix or all the files, you know, in etc NixOS somewhere else. You can store them up in GitHub, for example, and always have them backed up somewhere. So they are never lost and you never need to redo anything here. So then we have enabled Flakes, Musnix, that was done, the real-time privileges. And then work with the real-time privileges, yeah. Then what's also important, now what I'm going to do is to enable Flakes. What are Flakes? I mean, there are multiple Linux NixOS YouTube channels that explain this in better detail. For example, there's the Wim Joya YouTube channel, and if you really want to make a deep dive into NixOS from a code developer standpoint, his channel I would really recommend, because I myself have been referring to it lots of times. But again, you are going to configure Flakes. Now I could also explain what Flakes are, what the purpose is. I'm not going to do this. What I can say is that inside Flakes is the Flakes are basically a modernized system versioning management tool, and into which you are going to install Musnix. What is Musnix? Musnix is a pre-configured setup for NixOS systems for audio production. That already makes the system setup way easier. And then we make the other setups, real-time privileges, etc. And then we can go and install maybe Reaper, Ardour, etc. and the different packages. And we're also going to install Yabridge, typically, and also install Wine. And now, with Wine specifically, in regards of NixOS, there's something I really want to point out. Because on other Linux distros, like Arch for example, you install, for example, Wine staging, whatever. But then you have the following problem, that Yabridge is not compatible with the newest Wine version. So what you need to do is to manually downgrade it, and then the system breaks, or the Wine configuration breaks, and hooray, yeah, you have experienced it, it's not fun, it's annoying. So, on NixOS, you do not install Wine stable or Wine staging, you install Wine Yabridge. It is a Wine derivative, you could say, specifically tailored to Yabridge from the get-go. You do not need to configure anything, it is configured for you. That's it. That was the entire dramatic build-up right now. Pop it in and everything works. That's it. And again, you know, on Arch you had to downgrade the Wine version, which was annoying and sometimes things broke. Then I also made a video about installing Yabridge on a Debian system, you know, where you need to manually copy it and make symlinks and... oh god, no, I don't. Yeah, that's... again, that's what I meant, that working with NixOS is the best experience I've ever had. Also in music production, and I really mean this, okay? It is way easier to work with than with Arch, also with Debian, because I've reached a point, okay, I'm getting off topic here, where I dislike Debian more than other distros, even though it's supposed to be more stable. But if you want to install newer packages, you need to compile them from Git, and oh yeah, I'm not going to talk about this. NixOS also has the advantage that it has the most amount of packages in its repository than all other distros, even surpassing the AUR, and even being more reliable. You know, malware topic, you know, again. Why does NixOS has so many packages? One key characteristic of NixOS that it allows you to, for example, install different kind of programs, obviously, but each program has a separate list of dependencies. Okay, what am I trying to say with this? Sometimes, you know, dependencies would clash with each other because, you know, they have different kind of versions, and you know, in Arch, for example, then you get some incompatibility issues, etc. On NixOS, everything is installed sandboxed, more or less. Okay, this is not a perfect description, but similar to Flatpaks. And if two programs have the same dependency, they share the same dependency. If they have different kind of versions of the dependency, then you have multiple versions of the dependencies, those which are needed, in parallel. Other distros cannot do this. And so, now what we have done is, first of all, to create, you know, a configuration.nix, add our own .nix files, and yeah, add Musnix for optimizing for music production, and yeah. So now we can move on. And first of all, what we're going to do, for example, go to FlatHub. Then first we need bottles. Oh my god. Because this is required for installing Windows audio plugins to use them. I mean, you can also install them via regular Wine, but we are not going to do this. We are going to install Windows audio plugins via bottles. I have already made a video about it specifically. In the description, you can find it. Also in this playlist, you can find them. Then we are going to Flatseal. Install that one. And then also QPVgraph. But again, QPVgraph, you can also install them if you would want to. Go to Nix, Packages, QPVgraph. So again, whichever you prefer. So that's downloading, that's downloading. Again, QPVgraph, a GUI interface for managing Pipewire, may it be video sharing, MIDI sharing, or audio sharing. But again, I've also made a video about it in this playlist, you can find them. So, now we have done this. And I think we can just close that one, exit that one, not needed that anymore, close that one, close that one, that's already done, that's already done. Okay, great. Now we can go back to sudo nano etc NixOS configuration.nix, And now here comes something. I could go to NixOS Wiki. And in order to install Windows audio plugins, we need to install Yabridge. And in order to do this, we need to install Wine. And you can just smash them down into the system and environment packages, you know, whichever version you need. And here comes something that NixOS does do way better than all other Linux distros, because on Arch Linux, on Fedora, you need to downgrade your Wine version. And that creates incompatibility issues, you know, it's really annoying. So what we're going to do, go to Nix packages and type in Wine. So we are not going to use that one. We are not going to use that one. So which are we going to use? No. I think wine.yabridge. Yeah, that's the version. Or is it wine package? Wine, yeah. Wine wow package. Yabridge. Because, as this name implies, this is a Wine version specifically tailored to Yabridge. So you do not have this Wine version incompatibility issues. And then you can just type in sudo sudo NixOS rebuild switch password. And then we can go wine -- version. And here you have wine.21. I mean, because currently the newest version is Wine 10 point something. But again, this is the last Wine version compatible with Yabridge. And again, so you just need to install that one and everything is done for you. There's no need to downgrade anything, no need to do anything, okay? And then what you just need to do now, yeah, go here and install also Wine bricks maybe. And then just go here. Yabridge and Yabridge CDL. Yabridge CDL. Save it. Rebuild the system. Again, about Yabridge, working with Yabridge, the command interface, I've also made a video in the description, you can find it. Also in the playlist, like everything else. So now that's done, we can just type in wine boot. So it could not install Wine Mono. Let's install that one. Then we can also type in Yabridge CDL. Think. Voila. So now we have set up Yabridge. And again, I've made a video about working with Yabridge and how you can use them to scan Windows audio plugins. In that video, I'm gonna skip over that. again working with bottles. But now we are going to do is to install, you know, for example, Reaper. Reaper for the DAW, for music production. Then we can also install the SVS extension. Then also the Repack extension. Then we can also install Ardour. Now you just need to rebuild the system. And voila. Or go to Ardour. Skip over them here. We're gonna work with Pipewire. Samples we want to have. Voila. Voila, now it is enabled. Discard session, here delete this. And the exact same goes for the LV2 plugins. Plugin torture. X42 plugins. And for Flap audio plugins. Jaw Tape Motel, for example. And also for VST3. So Search XT synthesizer. And again, with Musnix, the audio programs, Ardour, are able to find these audio plugins without any issues. And this is basically the starter set for music production on NixOS. And yeah, other topics like that. But again, this was a basic introduction into NixOS, and it is the most stable experience with having newer packages. Because, you know, stable experience with Debian, for example, I don't want to talk about this. But again, yeah, this was basically a small introduction into NixOS music production. I will make further videos about it in the future, but again, a rough showcase for introduction. Thanks for watching this video. I hope this video was kinda helpful, interesting, whatever. Keep working, because there's still much to do, and go read Berserk.